Afternoon. We have completed a 3-day stay in New Delhi. The main focus of the visit was participation in a ministerial meeting. Foreign ministries held their latest BRICS meeting. Before that, we had a bilateral program with Indian colleagues. We had detailed talks with Foreign Minister Subramaniam and Jaishankar. We also had a conversation when we received by the Indian Prime Minister in a formal fashion. We confirmed all the agreements reached during the meeting with the head of government and during our talks with the Foreign Minister. We confirmed it at the meeting with the Prime Minister and during our talks with the Foreign Minister. Guys, get him out of here. We're doing it. We'll try again. During talks with Indian Foreign Minister Ubrama Jaishankar and a lengthy reception with the Indian Prime Minister at Rendon Mode, we discussed the key areas of our privileged strategic partnership, which were defined during the summits between President Putin and Prime Minister Modi, including the most recent event held here in New Delhi last December, LAC. Following that summit in December 2025, a crucial program for developing strategic directions for economic cooperation between our countries through 2030 was signed. It outlines all the necessary steps that will be taken to achieve the goal of $100 billion in bilateral trade by 2030. We examined ways to improve our existing mechanisms and further develop and strengthen these mechanisms for practical trade, economic and investment cooperation, ensuring that we are not dependent on the negative, unfriendly influence of third countries. We agreed to strengthen transport, technology, and investment cooperation, including joint development of the North-South International Transport Corridor and the Northern Sea Route. We also focused on the steps being taken to optimize the system of direct mutual settlements. We share a common commitment to increasing supplies of Russian hydrocarbons and fertilizers. Cooperation in the peaceful use of nuclear energy is developing very successfully, as is Saudi's cooperation in the peaceful exploration of outer space. In the peaceful use of nuclear energy, we discussed the possibility of providing us with a new site for the construction of several more nuclear power plant units, which would significantly strengthen India's energy security. We traditionally have a good level of military technical cooperation, including the joint production of modern weapons based on our advanced defense technologies. We also have promising plans in space exploration, including satellite navigation, manned space programs, and joint scientific research. We address the international agenda from a common perspective, both during bilateral talks with our India friends and at the BRICS ministerial meeting, who We focused primarily on preparations for the 18th BRICS Summit, which will take place here in New York City this September. At the ministerial level, we shared the view that BRICS has come a long way in its 20 years of existence, developing into a valuable, multifaceted partnership, I would say, encompassing virtually all areas of interstate interaction. And the association is truly seen as the key leading element in the process of shaping a polycentric world order and advancing the interests of the global majority. A very reliable, robust, I would say, culture of communication has emerged rooted in mutual respect and zero inequality, focused on taking into account everyone's opinions and establishing a fair balance of interests as a guarantee of the feasibility and implementability of all agreements reached. It is precisely this approach we are convinced that ensures BRICS stability and authority among the global majority and retains its appeal to an ever-increasing number of countries. In course, we also paid special attention to crises in various regions of the world, including the Middle East, including the crisis around the Strait of Hormuz, Iran, and the situation in Lebanon and the Palestinian territories away, where even the slightest of a Palestinian state is being eliminated in violation of the UN resolution or Libya, Yemen, all of this intertwines, Syria, all of this intertwines into a web of contradictions that is making the situation in the Middle East and North Africa increasingly complex. And virtually every one of the hotspots I mentioned is the reason of gross interference by Western countries in the affairs of a particular country, including armed invasions and the overthrow of regimes, which we have been witnessing over the past 15 years, perhaps, since the so-called Arab Spring, Darab Spring. We also discussed the unacceptability of the practice, which unfortunately continues, of unilateral coercive measures aimed at punishing sovereign governments and interfering in their internal affairs. In this regard, solidarity with our Cuban friends was reaffirmed beyond Cuba. As you know, is a BRICS partner country. This category of partner countries was established in October 2024 at the BRICS Summit in Kazan. And it was now represented by more than a dozen countries that already hold this status. We clearly spoke out in favor of continuing the reform of the global governance system in essence, the West, which cherished the globalization model once proposed by the United States, and for many decades promoted this model of globalization as optimal for the development of the entire global community, has with its own hands, through its unilateral sanctions, destroyed this universal model, which quickly fragmented. And now, of course, the international financial institutions that were created under the old model of globalization must undergo reform, This is long overdue. And these reforms must, above all, reflect the real weight of states in the global economy and in global finance. Let me remind you that BRICS and its partner Congress account for over 40% of global gross domestic product, while the Group of Seven, which still holds the reins of power at the Bretton Woods institutions, barely exceeds 30% of global gross domestic product. Therefore, reform is overdue. Our Western colleagues are trying in every way to restrain reform, but the trend is irreversible. According to forecasts, the average growth rate of BRICS countries will be around 3.7%, closer to 4% versus 2.6% for the global growth rate in the coming period. Also, we discussed all these issues in detail, and the Indian presidency will make general statements later today as to but I believe our main task has been accomplished. We outlined the key topics that will be on the agenda of the upcoming BRICS summit in October. In the current period, holding such an event will undoubtedly be a major event in global politics and economics. A question, please.
Please calculate.
Good afternoon, Sergey Viktorovich. 20 years. Natalia, slave Russia, 24. BRICS has been around for 20 years. During this time, the composition of both member and partner countries has grown significantly. Many Western countries don't like this. And of course, it's no secret that some countries are under pressure. Do you think this influences the further expansion of the association? Are there any applications yet?
There is interest. And there is an understanding that BRICS is a prototype of a future multipolar order, Dickhead. At the same time, I want to especially emphasize that no one is trying to isolate themselves from the rest of the world, from the global minority and the G20, where the interests of the global majority and the global minority can be discussed in a business-like, honest manner based on a search for a balance of interests is represented by the G20. It includes both the leading BRICS countries and BRICS partners, the G7 countries, and their allies. For example, the Asian countries, Japan and Korea, are also represented. The G20 is roughly evenly split between BRICS supporters and participants and G7 participants and partners. Overall, this is a very promising field, a platform. That is, of course, if our Western colleagues cease their attempts, which they have been actively undertaking for some time now, to Ukrainize both this agenda and the G20 agenda. Over the past couple of years, under the presidencies of, among others, South Africa, Brazil, and now India, we have been working to ensure that BRICS is categorically opposed to any political discussions within the G20 that would obscure the pressing tasks of reforming the global economy and the global financial system. Therefore, attempts to divert the discussion to controversial topics related to problems created by the West itself as a result of its aggressive policies will not be supported. These attempts will not be supported by the BRICS countries, which want to use the G20 to address the issues for which this group was created: the global economy, global finance, global trade, and a fair reform of narrow institutions and a generally fair approach to the global governance system, so that countries with the appropriate weight in the global economy, finance, trade, and logistics receive adequate representatives in these structures. The Monetary Fund, the World Bank, and the World Trade Organization. I don't see a decline in interest in BRICS as a result of pressure from Western countries, which especially the United States have publicly declared BRICS to be practically the main enemy of progress, which means everyone agreeing with Washington's initiatives. And I don't see a decline in interest in joining our association, either in terms of membership or in terms of joining the group of partner countries. There are specific requests for full membership also. I don't think there's any point in discussing this publicly. A practice has been introduced whereby BRICS membership will be considered from among those countries that have received a partner state status. And the second understanding is that at this stage we will not rush to expand the membership, because BRICS doubled its ranks a couple of years ago, and we need, well, if you will, to get used to working in a new, significantly expanded format, not on the domat.
Most Lalextaga continues the topic of BRICS expansion and 2 full members of the organization. The expeditionary forces Al-Qaeda in Iran, newly since 2024, are currently in a state of de facto armed conflict. Are BRICS discussing the use of organizational mechanisms to reconcile them? And is the situation considered a threat to the unity of the association? Thank you.
Indeed, contradictions have emerged between these 2 countries. And here, of course, we must keep in mind the need in such discussions, as when discussing any other conflicts, to focus on the essentials. What are the root causes of the current crisis? The root cause is well known to us all. The aggression of the United States and Israel against the Islamic Republic of Iran was not provoked in any way. While everyone is now calling on Iran and everyone else to open the Strait of Hormuz, I remind you that until February 28th of this year, when the aggression began, the Strait of Hormuz was functioning without any problems whatsoever. Freedom and navigation were ensured 100%. That's why when this aggression against the Islamic Republic of Iran was launched, it was launched with a very specific declared goal to end the 47 years during which Iran terrorized all its neighbors. The Indaya itvi esedas, the entire world. Just like the kidnapping of the Venezuelan president was trumped up with the pretext of his involvement in drug trafficking. And then it turned out that it wasn't drug trafficking at all, but Venezuelan oil, which the United States was interested in. Just like now, you see it all came down to oil flowing through the Strait of Hormuz. But it wasn't Iran that blocked this situation. It wasn't Iran that created the problem, including in relations with its neighbors, the Gulf Cooperation Council countries. For many years, we promote a concept for ensuring security in the Persian Gulf, which envisioned the beginning of a process of normalizing relations and building trust between Iran and the Arab monarchies with the participation of their main neighbors, with the participation of the Arab League, with the participation of the 5 permanent members of the Security Council. Because, well, the situation when the Arabs and Iran were at odds with each other was abnormal, intolerable, and only harmed the peoples of the countries in office in question. For many years, we held seminars and conferences, and scholars from all the countries I mentioned visited us. Not long ago, our Chinese comrades put forward a similar idea. Tehran also expressed its willingness to support this approach even before the current crisis. And in my ongoing contacts with representatives of the Arab monarchies, and we are in regular contact, I sense that they too understand the need for precisely this approach. Of course, the most important thing now is to end the current war and transform the more or less respected ceasefire into a final agreement to end all hostilities. But in the long term, of course, we need to think about some kind of stabilizing regional structure, some kind of regional process. We discussed this today and yesterday at the BRICS Foreign Ministers meeting. I don't think BRICS should necessarily claim a moderating role, but individual BRICS members, especially those with a vested interest in ensuring that there are no problems in the Strait of Hormuz and the Persian Gulf, should. Well, India, the chair, is directly dependent on oil supplies, including from this region. Why not offer its good offices, including, as the country chairing the Riga summit, and invite Iran and the Emirates, for starters, to talk with each other and figure out how to prevent this hostility. And they are trying to sow this hostility from the outside. I have no doubt that one of the goals of the aggression against the Islamic Republic of Iran was precisely to prevent the normalization of relations and even to create new problems in these relations, and this Iran and its Arab neighbors. And we must act with precisely the opposite goal. Therefore, I hope that Pakistan is now helping to establish dialogue, be Iran and the United States. This is to resolve the immediate problem, the current crisis. And in the long term, India, given its extensive diplomatic experience and authority, could very well play the role of an intermediary between Iran and its Arab neighbors. It's show.
Channel 1, please.
Hello, Lavrov. Anatoly, Channel 1. Do the BRICS countries share the opinion that the Ukrainian crisis is coming to an end, and can they somehow facilitate this? Thank you.
I briefed our partners in considerable detail at today's and yesterday's meetings about our assessments of the currents of the state of the situation around Ukraine, including in the context of the issues on the BRICS agenda. Specifically, the reform of the global governance if we're talking about the Bretton Woods institutions from this perspective, look at the statistics over the last 3 or 4 years. I don't recall the exact figures now, and I can't vouch for the exact figures. But look at which country received loans and how these loans compare. Over the past 3 or 4 years, Ukraine has received loans from the International Monetary Fund for about, well, I'm afraid I might be mistaken, but almost 600% of its quota. That is 6 times its quota. And this amount of loans is several times higher than the loans received by all African countries during the same period combined. This, incidentally, is a clear example of how the Bretton Woods institutions are currently governed and in whose interests. It's certainly not in the interest of equitable global governance. None of my colleagues commented on the Ukrainian crisis at yesterday's or today's meetings, but repeat, we provided a fundamental assessment of what is happening. And given that the issue of United Nations reform was also on the agenda of our meetings in Delhi, we, among other things, called for a firm insistence on the observance of all principles of the UN Charter without exception, not selectively, but in their entirety, in all their interrelationships. We also drew particular attention to a section of the Charter that, for some reason, our Western colleagues have stopped citing and mentioning. I am referring to the requirement in the very first article of the UN Charter to ensure human rights regardless of gender, race, language, and religion. We drew attention to the fact that this specific clause regarding language and religion is being flagrantly violated by the Nazi regime that the West brought to power in Kyiv in February 2014. I have already mentioned this to journalists. Ukraine is the only country where an entire language is banned in all spheres of life. And this is a language that is the official language of the UN. And those Western and other representatives who consider it possible to communicate with the Kyiv regime don't even mention, judging by what we hear, and know the need to return to observing universal rules regarding language and religion here in Arab countries. There is no problem with Hebrew. Here in Israel, there are no problems with Arabic or Farsi or and wherever you look in the world, different religions, different traditions and civilizations coexist. But in Ukraine, this is possible. So, by the way, when I remind my Western colleagues, including some American ones, of this, I hear them say, well, if there is a settlement there, we will definitely incorporate this issue, this task of returning to observing rights in the area of language and religion. But this cannot be one of the conditions for a settlement. This must be done without any mutual concessions, simply because it is Ukraine's responsibility, not only under the UN Charter, but also under its own constitution, which has not been repealed, and in which is the rights of Russians and other national minorities are enshrined and guaranteed to the state. In violation of its own constitution, it passed a raft of laws, and these laws are in practice forcibly implemented into everyday life. Therefore, my other colleagues listened attentively. I am sure they understand what is happening, but no comments were made on Ukrainian affairs. Yes, all this is being discussed, and our trade with India has long been shifting from the dollar to national currencies and the currencies of other countries that do not abuse their position in the global monetary and financial system. There are no restrictions for us in any of the areas you mentioned. We will be ready to consider everything that interests our Indian partners. There have never been any failures or refusals, and I don't foresee any coming.
Please, Izvestia.
Sergey Viktorovich, Izvestia Antanspitsky. Donald Trump, before flying to China, answered journalist questions and said a short no to the question, is there a mutual understanding between him and Vladimir Putin on the Donbass issue? What does that mean? It was previously said that such an understanding existed. Thank you.
We have always said that we have clear understandings following the talks that took place in Anchorage, Alaska on August 15th of this year. Let me remind you, we have discussed this repeatedly, and the President mentioned it. A week before this summit, Stephen Witkoff, President Trump's special envoy, came to Moscow. He brought American ideas on how to ensure a long-term, sustainable settlement of the conflict in Ukraine. These ideas were based on the United States' understanding of the root causes of the current crisis, including, as President Trump has repeatedly stated, the inadmissibility of Ukraine's involvement in NATO and the recognition of the realities on Earth that emerge as a result of the referendums held in the relevant territories. And so, based on this understanding, Mr. Witkoff brought the corresponding proposal to Moscow. We took them into consideration. And a week later, during a meeting in Alaska, President Putin said he was ready. He would support this American initiative, all of these American proposals. So, what I'll mention, I hope I'm not revealing a big secret, that our president he listed all the American components of these proposals, one by not. And after each component, he turned to Steve Witkoff, who was present at the negotiations, asking, wow, am I correct? Am I correctly describing what you brought to the table? All these questions were answered affirmatively, so Alaska ended with, well, call it an understanding if you like, but the spirit is a separate matter. Now everyone's talking about the spirit of Alaska, the spirit of Anchorage. The spirit in relations between the presidents of Russia and the United States is always friendly, comradely, and mutually respectful. In Alaska, beyond the spirit, understandings were reached, well, even agreements on the basic principles of a settlement, if you will, which were proposed by the United States and supported by the Russian Federation. Since then, the Europeans and, of course, Zelensky, of course, and especially London have been doing everything to prevent the United States from maintaining its commitment to its own initiative. I just want to reiterate that this didn't mean we would simply publish the Ankara judge decision and everything would be settled immediately. Basic principles were agreed upon there. But there's still many issues that require more detailed consideration. Order. And such consideration will be possible as soon as we confirm the Alaska agreements. I hope this happens sooner rather than later. But as President Putin said, we will achieve the goals of the special military operation under all circumstances, preferably through diplomatic means, but if not, we will continue to do so within the framework of the special military operation.
In
my opinion, the unclassified statistics published here and in other publications in neighboring countries and in the global media in general show that oil supplies to India have recently increased too. And everything here depends not on us, but on our Indian comrades who have always received a positive response to their requests for increased energy supplies, we are ready to continue to act in this manner. I have already said that the statement of the chairman of the Indian presidency will be made later today, as the Minister of Foreign Affairs assured us.
Excellency, from Sir, how do you see Indo-US relation in the next few months in the BRICS and of course the Ind-R or Standima?
Well, I described this in detail in my opening remarks. We are also preparing for the BRICS summit. Prime Minister Narendra Mohammed confirmed yesterday that it will be his honor to visit the Russian Federation this year. We will be preparing for this summit as well. Our relations, if we list all the areas in which we cooperate, are quite strong, but that won't be enough for us from today. I briefly outlined them in my opening remarks. We are interested in ensuring that our special privileged strategic partnership continues to develop in all areas as effectively as possible. And during the talks during this visit, we felt reciprocity from the Indian side. They have exactly the same attitude.
Hello, Sergey Viktorovich. I'm Marty Arvik with you. The Europeans are now talking about their desire to renew dialogue with Moscow and plan to appoint their chairman. How do you assess this position on the part of Europe? Do you think they are truly serious and sincere in their intentions?
Regarding European sincerity, I won't even repeat the examples mentioned by both the President of the Russian Federation and in my speeches, and examples of hypocrisy and outright deception. Just look at the confessions of Ms. Merkel and Mr. Hollande, who signed the Minsk agreements in February 2015 together with President Putin and then Ukrainian leader Poroshenko. They were unanimously approved by the UN Security Council, and then, without a trace of embarrassment, they simply declared a few years later, we had no intention of implementing the Minsk agreements or commands. We needed to buy time to pump Ukraine with weapons. And, well, now no one is even wearing masks. Germany is again leading the movement in support of Nazism in Europe. President Zelensky has now been appointed to the role of Führer Ambassador, and under his aegis as the new association of Europeans with Germany playing the initiative and leading role is being carried out in a very alarming way. No issue. It's reminiscent of history. Well, but the alarm is offset by the fact that we know how these stories ended, and there can be no other endings to these stories. Therefore, when now, suddenly, the Europeans woke up and stopped imploring the need to inflict a strategic defeat on Russia on the battlefield and ensure that Ukraine wins everything, and suddenly they began to say, well, yes, we will have to Russia someday, but they will have to stipulate that they will talk. However, we will have to determine what and when we will, Europeans. You know, I simply cannot take such statements seriously. President Putin, the Europeans, political maturity and sensitivity. When, in response to a question on May 9th during an evening press conference, he said that former German Chancellor Schröder could be the Europeans' representative in the Europeans in negotiations with Russia. Look at the uproar. Some say it's categorically unacceptable. Kaja Kallas, how could she have said it without her? Some, including in Germany, did not dismiss the possibility. The discussion that followed our president's response was quite amusing. And someone even started mentioning, well, yes, Schroeder, he seems acceptable to Moscow, but he needs to be kept under some kind of supervision. Oh, and Frank-Walter Steinmeier, the current president of the Federal Republic of Germany, was mentioned. But returning to the question of whether the West can be trusted, I'll remind you of another event that preceded it, which took place a year before the Minsk agreements. And the point was that in February 2014, a peace agreement was signed between then President Yanukovych and the opposition, which provided for early elections and the resolution of all aspects of the so-called Maidan crisis. So this agreement was guaranteed by France, Poland, and Germany. And on behalf of Germany, it was signed by that very same Frank-Walter Steinmeier. And the morning after Steinmeier signed this agreement, the opposition tore up this agreement, spat on Germany, France, Poland, and all their guarantees, seized government buildings, and began, in fact, chasing Yanukovych in order to physically eliminate him. We urgently appealed to Berlin, Paris, and Warsaw and said, dear friends, you guaranteed the agreement and bring the opposition, which is under your control, to its senses. They all bashfully avoided answering, saying, well, it's a coup, not a coup. Well, democracy sometimes takes unexpected turns. That's all. Therefore, we already know how much we can trust Mr. Steinmeier. And we are not asking for any negotiation processes with Europe. And President Putin's response must be considered precisely in the context of the fact that we are ready, but we will never run or beg. Moreover, I repeat once again, the Europeans have a completely negative track record when it comes to their ability to negotiate. They had chances to contribute to the Ukrainian settlement. I have already mentioned them. This includes February of 2014, when a coup d'etat ultimately took place in violation of the agreement. This includes February 2015, when the Minsk agreements were signed. In both cases, the Europeans were guarantors. In both cases, they failed in their role as guarantors and bona fide mediators.
Please.
Good afternoon, Sergeyevich.
Yesterday, the White House announced that Chinese President Xi Jinping being at a meeting with U.S. President Donald Trump. He expressed interest in increasing U.S. oil purchases to reduce China's dependence on the situation in the Hormuz Strait. Do you see a risk in such a decision that China will reduce its purchases of Russian energy resources? And in your opinion, is the currently actively announced with cooperation with China on a wide range of issues an attempt to reanel daw aradanet Moscow and Beijing? And what, in your opinion, is the likelihood of such actions by Washington being successful?
Thank you. You've twisted so much reasoning here. We do not interfere in the trade relations of third countries or oaths. We have extensive agreements with the People's Republic of China secured by contracts, intergovernmental treaties, and agreements in virtually all areas of interstate communication, including in the trade, economic, and investment spheres, including, of course, energy supplies. And including, of course, energy supplies. And on the basis of these agreements, we conscientiously fulfill all our obligations, and the People's Republic of China fulfills its obligations. At the same time, we do not ask the Chinese to discuss their plans in relations with us, with other states. The People's Republic of China does not make such inappropriate requests of us. Therefore, if the agreements that have been or will be reached between Beijing and Washington meet the interests of our Chinese friends, we will be only glad, but we will never participate in the next games to implement, because I think, bequeath to the Washington's relations with both Beijing and Moscow should be better than the relations between Beijing and Moscow. Well, this is the game that the Americans and the colonialists in general have been playing for many years, divide and rule. We are familiar with it. It is still very much alive in Western politics. This is not our method. This is not the method of the People's Republic of China. We are connected with China by relations that, as President Putin and Chairman Xi have repeatedly stated, including in their joint statements, these relations are much deeper, much stronger than traditional military, political alliances. This is a relationship of a new type, and they stabilize global politics, the global economy, more than anyone else, more than any other factor.
RBC, please. Valentina Schwartzman, RBC. U.S. Secretary of State Mark Ruby stated that the U.S. plans to ask China to put the pressure on Iran to end the conflict, including on the issue of unblocking the Strait of Hormuz. How do you assess this approach? Have you discussed this with your BRICS colleagues? And are there any contacts planned with the Chinese side to comprehensively discuss the results of Trump's visit to China and the agreement reached there?
We are not aware of any visits by the United States to the People's Republic of China. By Hududaye. Well, if we talk about the essence of what you just described, so that China would have helped the Americans open the Strait of Hormuz. I will emphasize once again that the Strait of Hormuz was not closed and was completely free for shipping until February 28th, when for the second time in 6 months, the U.S. and Israel began aggression against the Islamic Republic of Iran. What does the People's Republic of China have to do with what's going with this? What do the Americans require of China in this regard? It's hard for me to understand where to say we've started out as something. We've reached a dead end, and we need to unblock energy supplies, fertilizer supplies, and food supplies through the Strait of Hormuz. Well, it's not really convenient for us to do this. Iran doesn't want to put pressure on Iran. Well, it's such a simple scheme, of course, but I don't think this is the example that international diplomacy should be guided by. The main thing is to eliminate the root cause. The root cause is well known to everyone. You can read about it in analytical articles and in cartoons published by the Western press.
Please, Russia alone. Olga Knyazeva-Vesti. Sergey Viktorovich, please tell us how relations with Armenia will be built at the ministerial level and how they will be built, taking into account all the events and Pashinyan's statements.
Well, we have relations with Armenia, Armenia. These relations
are close, allied, but at the same time complex, even how the West is trying to subjugate Armenia, following the Commonwealth of independent states and several Armenia's mutually beneficial economic trade and investment ties with its partners in the CI and the Eurasian Economic Union. President Putin, on April 1, while receiving Prime Minister Pashinyan in the Kremlin, spoke frankly about this, saying that we will respect any choice our Armenian friends make, but we must also understand that commitments within the Eurasian Economic Union cannot be maintained if Armenia, as has been repeatedly declared at the highest level, embarks on the path to joining the Eurasian Union. There are simply mutually exclusive obligations there, including trade regimes and much more. Russian Deputy Prime Minister Alexei Overchuk, who oversees the Eurasian Economic Union, also spoke about this. We are being absolutely honest and forthright with our Armenian friends here. We simply believe this is it's the Allied responsibility to explain how economic integration processes are being structured in the modern world and how the Eurasian Economic Union differs from the European Union. Well, judging by the progress of the EU accession negotiations between Brussels and our Serbian friends, one of the conditions being put forward to anyone who wants to get closer and gain membership in the European Union is a full adherence to the EU's foreign policy, almost there. The essence of this foreign policy at this stage is open, rabid, and aggressive Russophobia. I think our Armenian colleagues are also aware of this and will take it into account. I also have very good personal contacts with my colleague, Foreign Minister Rorat Mirzayan. We communicate mainly by phone, although the last time we had a meeting of CIS foreign ministers here. A deputy minister represented Armenia, but we know him well, and he actively participated in the discussion and in the preparation of the final documents. Now, I think, will be the optimal opportunity to discuss the problems that are arising in connection with the fact that the European Union insists on drawing Armenia into its orbit, including at the cost of risking the benefits that Armenia receives through the Eurasian Economic Union. The opportunity to discuss all these issues will honestly and frankly arise at the end of the last week of May, when the Supreme Eurasian Economic Council Summit will be held in Kyrgyzstan in Kazakhstan. True, I heard that Prime Minister Pashinyan mentioned that he is busy with election matters and will not be able to attend this meeting of the leaders of the Eurasian Economic Union. That would be, of course, sad, because it would be a good opportunity to discuss the things that are in the air à coucou.
Final question.
Hello, Sergey Viktorovich. Igor Koroshenko, RT in French. Emmanuel Macron recently stated that Russia is a real colonizer in Africa. How could you comment on such statements from the French leadership?
Well, who else but the French? Those who know what real colonialism is, are real colonizers, or barter squad. You know, I remember years ago, 5 years ago probably, when changes were happening in the Sahel countries, particularly Mali. Why Mali? I participated in the UN General Assembly, and on the sidelines of the General Assembly session, as always, many bilateral meetings are held. And I had a meeting with Joseph Borrell, who at the time was acting as Kai Carlos. And with him, at that meeting, was the French Minister of Affairs, Le Drian, I think that was his name. And since Mali was then a fairly hot topic on the international agenda, they started saying, how come you supported the change of government and so on? And among other arguments, I said, okay, the new governments, they turn to us to help them ensure reform or strengthen their security structures. We are responding to their request. Later, this was also said, by the way, in speeches at plenary sessions of the General Assembly. But in response, my interlocutors, both French, one the French foreign minister, and the other, the High Representative, he is Spanish, Josep Borrell. They told me in response, well, you know that the Sahel in Africa is generally our zone of the European Union. I said, I don't know. I know that there were colonial possessions there, but then you declare political independence. There are special decisions of the United Nations. I've never read anywhere that former colonies are forever assigned to you as countries where others have no right to meddle. But that was their philosophy, so it's probably already in the genes of French colleagues. And they measure everyone by their own yardstick. We have a different yardstick.